Noah Brown has finally broken his silence, exposing the 5 people from Alaskan Bush People he hated the most.
The world saw us as a pack, a family stronger than the wilderness itself. But the truth, that image was a lie. Behind the cameras, there was jealousy, betrayal, and people I could never trust. Some bonds were broken so badly, they could never be fixed.
To fans, he was the soft-spoken inventor, the thoughtful brother who seemed to hold the Wolfpack together. But behind that calm exterior, Noah carried wounds and grudges that never healed. So, who hurt him so deeply that trust was shattered forever? Today, we reveal the shocking list Noah never wanted the world to know. And to understand his bitterness, we have to return to the very first cracks that appeared within the family. When Alaskan Bush People debuted in 2014, the Browns looked like an unshakable wolf pack bound by survival and loyalty. But even then, Noah stood apart. Not the wild climber or thrill seeker, but the quiet dreamer and inventor. At first, he believed in the unity the cameras showed. Yet behind the laughter were cracks, arguments hidden, rivalries disguised as togetherness. To Noah, the Wolfpack wasn't always loyalty, it was performance. And that's where his private list began, not with strangers, but with family. Number 1. Matt Brown. For Noah, his oldest brother wasn't just family, he was a hero. Growing up, Noah looked at Matt as larger than life, funny, fearless, and always ready to dive into chaos with a grin. Matt was the kind of brother who could take the hardest day in the wilderness and make it feel like an adventure. He taught Noah how to prepare for storms, how to improvise when supplies ran low, and how to keep going when everything around them seemed impossible. In Noah's eyes, Matt wasn't just a sibling, he was a shield, someone who made the wilds of Alaska feel a little less dangerous. The cameras caught some of this charm. Fans loved Matt's energy, his unpredictability, and his ability to light up a scene. But what they didn't see was the darkness creeping in long before the world noticed. By 2016, that darkness could no longer be hidden. Matt's struggle with alcohol addiction exploded into the public eye, and the Brown family had no choice but to send him to rehab. For Noah, this was the first crack in the armor. The big brother he had once admired suddenly looked fragile, broken, and unreliable. It was a painful shift, one that forced Noah to see Matt not as a protector, but as someone drowning in demons he couldn't control. And while the family tried to hold together, Matt slipped further and further away. The distance only deepened when Ami was diagnosed with cancer. While the rest of the Wolfpack uprooted their lives to move to Washington and support her, Matt stayed behind in California. For Noah, that decision felt like abandonment at the worst possible time. He couldn't understand how the brother who once embodied family loyalty could turn his back when their mother needed them most. The wound grew even sharper when Matt began lashing out publicly. In interviews and social media posts, Matt accused the very family that raised him of betrayal. He claimed he was cut off from the show's profits, left broke and hungry, while the rest of the Browns lived comfortably under Billy's control. He painted himself as the victim of a family empire built on lies. For Noah, those words cut like a knife. He had sacrificed everything to stay by Ami's side during her illness, to help keep the family together, and here was Matt tearing it all apart in front of the world. And then came the darkest blow. In 2019, 2 women who had worked closely with Matt came forward with disturbing allegations of sexual assault, saying he crossed boundaries while intoxicated. The case never went to trial, but for Noah, it didn't matter. He had stood by his brother through addiction, through absence, through bitter accusations. But this was a line he couldn't look past. By that point, Matt's ties to the Wolfpack were frayed beyond repair. He no longer appeared on the show. He no longer called home. To fans, he was just another cast member who faded away. But to Noah, the loss was far more personal. It wasn't just that Matt had left. It was that he had shattered the very foundation of what Noah believed family was supposed to mean. For Noah, Matt wasn't just his brother. He was the first betrayal, the moment that proved even the strongest bonds could be broken. The brother he once idolized had become a stranger, his name carved painfully at the very top of Noah's secret list, a reminder that sometimes the people you love the most can wound you in ways you'll never fully heal from. Number 2. Snowbird Brown. To the outside world, Noah and Birdie seemed unshakable. They were the quieter Browns, the ones who didn't crave the spotlight like Gabe or Bear. Bird was known for her rugged loyalty to animals and the land, while Noah was the thoughtful inventor, always dreaming up new ways to make life easier in the wilderness. Fans often saw them as the balance in the Wolfpack, two siblings bonded by their differences, but behind the scenes, their relationship wasn't nearly as perfect as it looked. At first, their differences felt harmless. Noah respected Bird's connection to nature, and Bird tolerated Noah's odd inventions, even if she didn't always understand them. But over the years, those differences started to harden into opposites that clashed again and again. Bird wanted the family to remain traditional, hunting, building, and surviving with little more than grit. Noah wanted progress, tools, electricity, small comforts that made the wild less punishing. What began as small disagreements about chores or animal care turned into arguments about the bigger picture, how the family should live, how they should be shown on television, and what values really defined the Wolfpack. Bird often saw Noah's push for comfort as weakness. Noah, on the other hand, saw Bird's stubbornness as blind loyalty to an image that wasn't sustainable. The cracks widened as family drama spilled into the open. When Noah and his wife Rain filed restraining orders against Rain and hinted at deeper conflicts inside the family, Bird's stance was clear, and it wasn't with Noah. She defended Rain, stood by her, and made it known where her loyalty rested. To Noah, that was the moment he realized Bird wasn't in his corner anymore. She had chosen sides, and her silence toward him felt louder than words. It got worse as legal battles emerged. Accusations of substance abuse, harassment, and violence became public record. Noah, who believed family matters should stay within the Wolfpack, watched in disbelief as private wounds were dragged into courts and headlines. He expected Bird to at least acknowledge how painful this was, but instead, she distanced herself even further, framing him as the one causing division. For Noah, this was betrayal layered on betrayal. It wasn't just that Bird disagreed with him, it was that she dismissed him, minimized his pain, and refused to stand by him when the family fractured. He had grown up believing Bird would always be the sister who understood his differences. Instead, she became part of the wall, pushing him further from the pack. And then came the silence, the hardest part of all. Bird stopped defending him, stopped talking about him, and in many ways, stopped seeing him as part of her world. For Noah, silence from his own sister was worse than any harsh word. Silence meant indifference. Silence meant he no longer mattered in her life. By the time the dust settled, the bond they once shared was gone. What remained was cold distance, a hollow reminder that even the siblings you trust most can one day feel like strangers. In Noah's eyes, Bird was no longer the sister who laughed with him in the wilderness. She was the sister who turned her back when it mattered most. And for that, her name was etched into his list, not out of hatred, but out of the deep ache of betrayal by someone he thought would never abandon him. Number 3. Billy Brown. To millions of viewers, Billy Brown was the legend, the pioneer, who carved out a life in the Alaskan wilderness and turned his family into icons of survival. He was the strong patriarch, the voice that opened each episode, and the man fans credited with building the Wolfpack legacy. But to Noah, Billy wasn't just a leader. He was also a shadow, a presence so commanding it often left Noah invisible. From the very beginning, Billy controlled everything: where the family lived, how they lived, and even how they appeared on screen. All of it was decided by him. The narrative wasn't about Noah's inventions or personal struggles. It was about Billy's vision of a family empire. For Noah, it quickly became clear. His father wasn't just guiding them, he was directing them, like actors in a story he had already written. As a boy, Noah admired his father's strength. Billy had survived tragedies most people couldn't imagine. But as Noah grew older, admiration turned to frustration. Every decision from what they built to how money was handled was filtered through Billy. When Noah wanted independence, when he wanted to chase his own ideas, those dreams were often shut down. His inventions were quirky side stories for television, not serious contributions. His individuality was never fully acknowledged. The cameras made this worse. On television, Billy was portrayed as the wise leader. Noah, by contrast, was edited into the role of the oddball inventor, the eccentric brother with strange ideas. To the audience, it was harmless entertainment. But to Noah, it was painful. He wasn't being seen as who he really was. He was being turned into a character in his father's narrative. Even in private, Billy's grip didn't loosen. He decided when the family moved, who spoke to the press, and how conflicts were addressed. Money flowed through him, and with that control came power no one could question. For Noah, that meant years of biting his tongue, playing along, and sacrificing his own independence for the sake of family loyalty. He loved his father, but he also resented him, because loyalty came at the cost of losing himself. And then came 2021. Billy's sudden death shook the family and left a void no one could fill. But for Noah, grief was complicated. He mourned the man who raised him, but he also felt the weight of years of unspoken resentment. Billy had given him love and protection, yes, but he had also taken away freedom, choices, and the chance to fully define his own identity. Even after death, Billy's shadow lingered. The show still revolved around his legacy. Interviews still painted him as the great patriarch, and the family continued to live under the image he had created. Noah couldn't escape it. Every time fans spoke of Billy's greatness, Noah was reminded of the control that had shaped his entire life. Billy's name made it onto Noah's list, not because he was unloved, but because the hurt ran too deep. Noah loved his father fiercely, but he couldn't ignore the resentment. He couldn't ignore the way Billy's choices had placed the family in the spotlight, exposed them to judgment, and turned Noah's real self into a television version of who he was. For Noah, Billy Brown was both father and figurehead, protector and prison. He was the man Noah could never stop loving, and yet could never fully forgive. Because sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who love you, but love you in their way, not yours. Number 4. Gabe and Bear Brown. To millions of fans, Gabe and Bear were the energy of the Wolfpack, loud, wild, unpredictable, and always ready to turn survival into a spectacle. They brought humor and chaos to every episode, while Noah was often shown as the quieter brother in the background, focused on building, tinkering, or planning. On screen, it looked like balance, but behind the cameras, their relationships were far more complicated and far more fragile. At first, Noah loved his brother's energy. Gabe's strength and Bear's enthusiasm often lifted the family's spirits during hard times. They could chop wood, hunt, and face storms with a smile, and in those moments, Noah admired them. But over the years, what once felt like inspiration began to feel like pressure. Gabe and Bear leaned into their rugged, camera-ready personas, while Noah struggled to be taken seriously. His inventions were often brushed off as quirky or impractical, and instead of encouragement, he often got laughter. As the years went on, those little jabs turned into sharper edges. Arguments broke out about responsibilities, who worked harder, who pulled their weight, and who deserved more recognition. Gabe and Bear thrived on attention, often wrestling or showing off in front of the cameras. Noah, on the other hand, wanted peace and independence. He wanted to build a life for his wife and children outside of the constant spotlight. To his brothers, that looked like abandonment. To Noah, it was survival. The tension deepened when Noah began stepping away from the show. While Gabe and Bear doubled down on their roles as stars, Noah prioritized his family's safety, privacy, and future. That choice became a wedge. His brothers saw it as betrayal, walking away from the very thing that gave the Browns fame and fortune. Instead of respecting his decision, they mocked it. They painted him as the one who turned his back on the Wolfpack. For Noah, that was the moment things shifted from rivalry to betrayal. He had never mocked them for embracing their image. He had never told them how to live their lives. Yet when he chose a different path, they turned their backs and treated him like an outsider. The rivalry wasn't just about the show, it cut into personal life too. Arguments about money, about who had the right to call themselves the face of the family, and even about who truly carried Billy's legacy grew harsher. At times, the bond that once united them as brothers felt like a competition for approval, both from their father's memory and from the public watching at home. For Noah, the betrayal ran deep, not because of words, but because of silence. Gabe and Bear stopped standing up for him. They stopped defending him when others mocked his choices. They treated his independence as weakness, not strength. And to Noah, brothers who once laughed with him now felt like rivals standing in his way. By the time the divide was clear, Noah no longer saw Gabe and Bear as his protectors. He saw them as critics' reminders that even within the Wolfpack, loyalty wasn't unconditional. Their names were carved onto his private list, not out of hatred, but out of the sting of realizing that sometimes brothers can become the harshest judges. Number 5. The network behind the show. For Noah, perhaps the deepest betrayal didn't come from a sibling or even his father. It came from outsiders, the very machine that turned their lives into entertainment. From the beginning, the Alaskan Bush People cameras promised to capture reality, but Noah quickly learned reality wasn't what the producers wanted. They wanted storylines, conflict, and characters. And Noah, whether he liked it or not, became one of those characters. To the world, Noah was the oddball inventor, the quirky brother who came up with strange gadgets in the middle of the wilderness. Fans laughed, producers encouraged it, and the network leaned into that image. But what they didn't show were Noah's real contributions. The nights he stayed up fixing what was broken, the quiet ways he kept the family safe, the sacrifices he made for Ami when her health was failing. Those moments weren't entertaining enough. Instead, the network reduced him to a role, stripping away his depth and identity. And it wasn't just the editing. The network fed on family drama. Arguments were exaggerated, tensions were highlighted, private struggles became storylines. For Noah, it felt like exploitation. They weren't showing who the Browns really were. They were manufacturing a version of them the world wanted to consume. Every time he watched an episode, he saw a distorted reflection of himself. As years passed, Noah realized that the people making the most money from the Browns' pain weren't the Browns at all. It was the executives, producers, and outsiders who controlled the footage, the contracts, and the narrative. They weren't there when Ami cried from pain, or when Noah worked quietly to support his mother. But they were always there when the cameras needed rolling, ready to turn private heartbreak into a storyline that sold. For Noah, that was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. About watching his life, his identity, and his family's struggles repackaged into entertainment for strangers who would never know the truth. And while fans thought they were seeing the real Noah, he knew they were only seeing the version the network wanted them to see. That's why the network itself became the final name etched into Noah's private list. Not a family member, but an outside force that left scars just as deep. Because while family betrayal hurts the heart, being used and reshaped by outsiders cuts into the soul. So there it is, the 5 names Noah Brown could never forgive. Matt's spiral, Bird's distance, Billy's control, his brothers Gabe and Bear, and the network that used him. For years, Noah carried those scars in silence. But now, the truth is out. Even the quietest wolf can hide the deepest wounds. If you want more untold stories from the Wolfpack, don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think hurt Noah the most?